everyone. I'm Jyotsna Hegde with NRI Pulse. Today we are speaking with State Senator Greg Dolezal, Republican candidate for Lieutenant Governor of Georgia in the upcoming runoff election. Joining us as well is Karthik Bhatt, Chairman of the Advisory Committee of the Georgia Republican Party. Thank you both for taking the time to join us today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
So, Senator Dolezal, let's begin with you. Why did you decide to seek the office of the Lieutenant Governor, and what do you see as the primary responsibility of Georgia's Lieutenant Governor?
I've been in the state Senate for the last 8 years, and the Lieutenant Governor presides over the state Senate. So I've had the opportunity to watch over the past 4 years, in particular, Burt Jones lead the state Senate in a way that I thought was very good for Georgia, in a way that I thought was very positive for the conservative movement. And the Lieutenant Governor really has the ability to kind of usher legislation through that process, in addition to just presiding over the chambers. I think that we are in a unique moment in American history. The middle class is being squeezed. Georgian families are finding it hard to pay for gas, groceries, and childcare. And I think that Republicans need to be the party that steps up and offers the solution to help them find the American dream. Because if we do not, we see what happens in New York with the election of Zohran Mamdani, a Democrat socialist who does not believe in the free market capitalism principles that have made America so great.
So let's talk about priorities, right? So if elected, what legislative priorities would you champion for, during the first year of your office?
I've got a lot, but let me just pick a couple. I think that property taxes are out of control in Georgia. Families in my district and around the state are just getting crushed by these property taxes that keep going up and up and up. And we took a step this year to right sizing that by putting a cap on the annualized increases. But I believe that we need to move towards no property taxes in Georgia on the primary home for Georgians. The primary wealth creation tool in America for the last 100 years has been the middle class being able to purchase a home, usually in their 20s historically. A family would buy a home and build equity through that home and ultimately retire off of that equity. And that is becoming very, very difficult in today's America. The average age of a first-time home buyer is 41 years old in America. And that dovetails into another priority that I have. Metro Atlanta leads the nation in private equity groups and hedge funds using foreign investment money and buying single family homes in Atlanta and usually turning them into rental properties. And so this ties into what I was just talking about with the American dream and home ownership. And I do not believe that we can allow America to become a nation of renters. I believe that we have to ensure that American homes are for American families. And then one other thing that's a little bit of a deviation from some of the economic policies. I'm a massive believer in universal school choice, the idea that we're investing in students and not just the education system. The parents are at the driver's seat of their child's education, that we would allow them to take the state tax dollars that we are investing into their child's education and use that for whatever education opportunity the parents may believe is best. I authored a more limited school choice bill a couple of years ago. We now have thousands of students who are able to take advantage of what's called the Georgia Promise Scholarship. But I want all Georgian students to be able to do that. I think that it does allow the parents to find specialized education for their child. It injects competition into the ecosystem. And whenever you have competition, outcomes improve across the board. And so I want to see us join states like Texas, Tennessee, and Florida, Iowa, Arizona that have universal school choice.
Wonderful. I was going to ask you about that later, but
Well, there we go.
yeah. So, well, let's turn to the campaign itself. So your opponent, Kennedy, has emphasized his record and experience, right? So, what sets you apart, and why should Republican voters choose you in the runoff?
John's a good guy. He's my friend. When I went to the Senate 8 years ago, he was my assigned Senate mentor. And so we've worked together on a number of pieces of legislation. If I was looking for differences in our voting record, I would point you to the fact that I have opposed every tax increase that has come before me. These have been things like tax increases on Uber rides, Airbnb nightly stays. There's a $1 billion marketplace facilitator tax increase that kind of stuck under the radar that got passed. And then the other thing I'm hearing from a lot of Georgians is they're very concerned about the data center expansion and the pace of data center expansion in Georgia. And I'm the only person running for lieutenant governor who voted against the tax credits for the tax incentives for data centers. And if you want to know why so many of these are coming to Georgia, look at the fact that we are incentivizing them to come here. Businessmen and women will seek the best business deal, and Georgia has sweetened the pot. We give data centers about $1.5 billion a year in tax incentives, and I voted against that, and my opponent did not. So those would be some differences just coming from our record that I think are worth highlighting.
In fact, I wanted to ask you why, why you did that. Why do you think those incentives that they get are a bad deal for Georgia taxpayers?
Well, I'm against all crony capitalism and all corporate carve-outs. I think that the role of government is to level the playing field for anyone who wants to compete in our free market system. I don't believe it's the job of the government to pick out one industry or one type of building or one type of job and say government's going to pay this person to create this job. And meanwhile, the rest of us, I own a small business. We employ about 80 people here at my company. We're over here fending for ourselves while government's juicing the bottom line, frankly, for a bunch of trillion-dollar corporations to build data centers. So I would say I've been proven right on that because what the studies have shown us is that those data centers would actually be coming to Georgia, about 70% of them either way. And so we have to do a number of things on data centers. I think that we really need to take a harder look at how they're approved. There should not be any non-disclosure agreements between local governments and the data center companies. There should not be any eminent domain used for data centers. But let me tell you one other vote difference. Senate Bill 34 last year was a bill that wanted to say by law that residential ratepayers, so you and I with our power bills, could not be forced to subsidize the grid expansion, so building new power plants and new capacity to facilitate data center construction. I voted in favor of that bill, in favor with the people, and John voted opposed to that bill that was largely opposed by the power company. And so that's another example, I think, of, I do not believe that the homeowners should be forced to pay for us to build more power plants so that data centers can expand here in Georgia.
Okay. So let's focus on some issues, affecting families, right? So families here in Georgia are really feeling the impact of rising costs, right? So what would you do to make Georgia more affordable?
I already mentioned property taxes, but one of the things that we do in Georgia that's unique in the Southeast is we take away 5% of people's income before they even get their paycheck. We have the largest income tax in the Southeast. Tennessee is at 0%. Florida is at 0%. And I would like to see Georgia move to 0% as well. That would provide immediate relief for Georgia families. We passed a bill out of the state Senate this year that was putting us on the path to doing that. We weren't able to get that across the finish line, but that has been an active conversation ever since I got elected, was how do we move the needle? We've lowered the income tax now 4 years in a row. I think that we need to do it faster, and we think we need to be more aggressive.
So let's talk about education. It's another area with a lot of voters mind, particularly the South Asian. So we often hear about teacher shortages and retention challenges. So what is your vision like for the K to 12 education in Georgia, and how can, students, be directly absorbed into the workforce? What is that? What can we do about that?
Yeah, those are really two separate questions. Let me touch on the teacher piece as well. My mom was a public school teacher, and so I watched her love her job, but I also watched her struggle with the frustration of the bureaucracy and essentially the government being in the classroom. I think we've got to get out of the way and let these teachers teach. I think that we have an environment in Georgia where we have teachers being forced to teach to a test because they're measured by their CCRPI scores. We have given teachers significant pay raises under the leadership of Governor Kemp. I was happy to vote for all of those, but I think that we've got to give teachers a stronger career pathway over time. Right now their pay essentially freezes after 21 years. I think that their pay scale should continue to increase, and we should allow them to look at teaching not as a 21-year career in Georgia, but as a 40-year career. My mom taught into her 60s, and if you've ever had one of those old school teachers that's been teaching for a long, long time, they're some of the best teachers you have because they know what they're doing.
So true.
And they also they're great to have in a school because they help the younger teachers be able to learn some tricks of the trade. And so getting to the workforce piece, well, I own a software development company,
Mhm.
and we really are viewing our employment through a different lens than we did 15 years ago. I frankly do not care where you went to college. I don't care if you went to college. I want to know if you have the raw material and the skill set to be able to write code, be able to get along with people, work as part of a team, lead a team. And these are all things that could be taught either, frankly, directly in our company, in a coding boot camp, in a trade school. I think that one of the things that we need to do culturally is deleverage the emphasis on the 4-year college degree, which for a number of students does not deliver the value compared to the cost. If you want to be a doctor or lawyer, 100%, you have to do that. But there's a lot of jobs in today's economy that you do not need a college degree for. And I find that, frankly, in affluent areas like the one in which I live, a college degree is often a badge of honor for mom and dad, more so than it is something that offers a true value to the student. And I hate seeing these kids come out of college strapped with 6 figures of debt, and they go and get a job, for $50,000 a year, and they just feel crushed, like they're never going to be able to get out from underneath that debt.
So let's move on to public safety, right? So, what are your top public safety priorities for the state?
Fully fund the police, put the bad guys in jail, throw away the key, get rid of woke judges. We've seen a number of different emphases over the last few years to either defund law enforcement, to reduce or get rid of mandatory minimum sentences. Charlie Kirk used to talk about, and I think that he was right, that we have an under incarceration problem in America.
Mm.
If you look at a lot of these career criminals that have been kind of turnstiled through the criminal justice system and put back on the street, they sometimes commit some of the most heinous crimes. And it's especially offensive when you see that happen when this person had been previously arrested 15 or 20 times, and the judge just didn't have the guts to put them in jail where they belong.
Okay. So looking at, Georgia's future growth, right? So Georgia continues to grow rapidly, and what are some of the biggest opportunities and challenges, that come along with that kind of growth?
Yeah, Governor Kemp has done a great job redirecting a lot of this economic development into rural Georgia, which is frankly on life support in terms of a lot of these small town economies. Even when we talk about getting rid of property taxes, for example, one of the things we hear from our friends in rural Georgia is that's going to be harder for them to do if you try to shift to a consumption tax, because they frankly have not very much industry to speak of, not very much retail industry to speak of. And so I think that that is one of the areas, is to ensure that we continue to invest with rural Georgia. When we see companies come in, we've got to sell the opportunities that exist in rural Georgia. Metro Atlanta is going to continue to grow, frankly, by accident, right? Regardless of what we do, it's a thriving city. People want to be here. We can continue to create the environment for growth, and Metro Atlanta will continue to grow, probably without some of the specific adjustments and fine tuning that we may need to do in rural Georgia. I think as well, we have to be very mindful of the types of businesses that we attract here. I want to see small and medium-sized companies thrive and grow here. That's one of the advantages, I think, of getting rid of the income tax. More than half of Georgians work for a small and mid-sized company. So while government tends to focus on landing the big fish, the big flashy hyper center, and we've been successful in landing some of those, I don't want to lose sight of the small and medium-sized companies in the process of doing that, because those are Georgia-owned companies, Georgia-grown companies, and I want to make sure that that continues to be a thriving space in our economy.
So speaking of, growth and change, Forsyth County today looks very different from what it was 20 years ago, with many immigrant communities making it home, right? So do you see that diversity as a strength? And what message do you have for these communities?
I would say that I see unity as our strength. I don't think that diversity for diversity's sake is ultimately the goal. I think that the goal is that we see people come together and have cohesion as Americans, that we all are working to pursue the American dream, that we wake up as neighbors and we wave to each other on our way to work or dropping our kids off at school, and we learn to live together and love each other as neighbors, but ultimately recognize that we each have a part to play in today's culture and in today's society. And so I think that part of the American dream has always been called a melting pot. And the ideas are that we come here from wherever we came from. I'm a European mutt. My parents have and grandparents and great grandparents have different lineages throughout Eastern and Western Europe. And whenever my ancestors came, they came here to pursue the American dream. When Kartik came here, he came here to pursue the American dream. He is a proud American. He sees himself as an American. I see him as an American. And I think that that unity between he and I ultimately is the goal and the strength. And that I think is what we need to focus on.
So, healthcare is another major concern for many Georgians. So, what should the state's role be, in your opinion, in addressing healthcare costs and, physician shortages?
I think that the state's role should be less than what it is. And I think that the government's involvement in healthcare has been one of the primary cost drivers, if not the primary cost driver. I remember when the Affordable Care Act was passed, and as a small business owner, every year since the Affordable Care Act has been passed, we have had double-digit increases in the insurance costs that we provide for our employees. So much like a lot of government programs, it's done the exact opposite of what the name is. It has made healthcare unaffordable. I am, knock on wood, a healthy middle-aged man with 4 kids and a healthy wife. And we are forced by the government to purchase more insurance than we need. I don't need an insurance plan that pays for my annual checkup because I'm able to pay for that out of pocket. But I am forced to pay for insurance that I don't need. I would like to see more free market principles implemented in the healthcare side. You mentioned the physician shortage. I think that that's a very important question. We have made significant investments as a state in our medical schools to ensure that we have Georgia trained doctors here in Georgia. We've increased residencies. We've done a number of things to expand the pool of Georgians. This is another area, though, where rural Georgia needs to be talked about, frankly, a little bit separately from the metro area, because there are unique challenges in rural Georgia. Before I got to the General Assembly, we created the Rural Hospital Tax Credit, something that my family has donated to in the past.
So, what's the one thing, I'm going back to this housing costs and property taxes. So, what's the one thing you as a lieutenant governor would do to make home ownership more affordable?
Did I lose you? Okay, you're back. You guys froze for a
Oh,
second. Can you hear
uh,
me?
oh, yes, I can hear you.
Okay, perfect. I
Okay.
heard your question. There's not just one thing. It's a multitude of things. We need to ensure that we get Blackstone and Vanguard out of the purchasing of sold single family homes here in Georgia. We need to see some deregulation. About 30 to 40%, depending on who you ask, of the cost of a new home is in regulation. I wrote the red tape rollback bill here in Georgia. We were not able to get that passed, but it would have been the most significant deregulation bill in the state. A lot of those regs actually come from the federal government, and we have home builders having to chase all these new energy codes and regulatory mechanisms. There's some adjustments and things we need to look at as far as our land use in the state. And those are all things that we need to do in addition to addressing the property tax issue as well.
So, you introduced legislation to ban the Sharia law in Georgia courts, right? Why was that issue important for you?
Yeah, if you look at outside of Dallas, Texas, there's an Islamic tribunal that adjudicates in really a parallel legal system, family law cases and business law cases under the precepts of Sharia law. And before that ever happens in Georgia, I want to ensure that we do not allow that to happen in Georgia. We have one constitution. We have one law framework here in Georgia that we need to follow. I do not want to see any parallel legal systems get set up in Georgia. And so that bill would ban all foreign laws from being able to supersede the Constitution in these tribunals and these parallel legal systems. And so I think that it's important essentially to stop the problem before it comes to Georgia. It's very similar to when I passed the Riley-Gaines Act. When I wrote that bill, we had seen things happen a little bit here in Georgia, but largely in other states. And so we wanted to ensure that we protected female sport. I think it's very similar to protecting Georgians from Sharia law.
So, looking beyond the headlines, Senator, what is the one issue you think is facing Georgia and is not given enough attention?
I think that the next generation is losing sight of the American dream. I think that they think that that's something that their grandparents talked about, that they think that somehow has changed, that they can't participate in it. And I think that as America turns 250 years old this year, we need to think about how do we cause the next generation to fall in love with the American dream again,
Mm.
to participate in the upside of free market capitalism, to feel like they do have the opportunity to live a better life than their parents lived. And I think that that's kind of lurking under the waves a little bit, if you will. And it's why you see Zohran Mamdani get elected, is because he took a message to the next generation of government grocery stores and rent control. And when you got young people that can't afford to buy food and can't afford rent, they tend to fall prey to a Pied Piper like Mamdani, and we have to make sure that does not happen here in Georgia.
So, finally, Senator, if elected, what would success look like after 4 years as lieutenant governor for you?
I get a little jealous because they call Florida the free state of Florida. And we've done a number of great things here in Georgia, and Governor Kemp has done a great job, and Burt Jones has done a great job as our lieutenant governor. I want to build on that so boldly and so aggressively that people all over America say, "What is going on in Georgia?" And they start calling it the free state of Georgia, to where everybody looks at us and says, "We want to be just like that state."
Well, Senator Dolezal, it's been wonderful talking to you. Thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your vision for Georgia's future. Karthik, thank you so much for being with us as well and making this happen. And thanks to our viewers for tuning in. I'm Jyotsna Hegde with NRI Pulse.
Yeah.